Welcome to Roll for Origin, Super's TTRPG History. My name is Lowell, and I'm here with Jay.
I'm Jay, creator of Lifted, Indomitable, a Super's role-playing game about ordinary folks with extraordinary powers.
And today we are talking about two games together, which are related and very interesting. And eventually I'm hoping that we're going to come and talk about some of the settings that are for it. But today we're focusing on Godlike and Wild Talents, which is another one of the biggies here. For me, one I've read but not played, but it is one that Jay has played. We're getting some of that experience at the table. So let's have you give the overlook, the pitch for Godlike slash Wild Talents.
Sure. And I think you're right. I think you have to talk about them both together. Godlike, superhero role-playing in a world on fire, 1939 to 1946, was released in 2001 on a hardcover edition. It uses the one-roll engine rules created by Greg Stolz. Godlike offers a complete supers game set in World War II, with players taking on the roles of allied super beings fighting on the front lines. The success of Godlike led to publisher Arc Dream releasing a limited print edition of Wild Talents in 2006. Unlike Godlike, Wild Talents is designed as a more universal supers game, adaptable to different settings. That printing ran out quickly. 4 years later, in 2010, they released a second edition of Wild Talents, which updated the rules. 2 years later, they released a revised edition of Godlike. I have all of those books.
Oh, I just have two.
Fun fact, I created a Palm Pilot dice roller for the Arc Dream team for Godlike.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Dennis was a big Palm Pilot user at the time. And so I ended up with a signed copy
Oh,
of
my,
Godlike.
that is such a deep cut. Oh, shit.
Yeah, that was way
Oh, my
back in the day.
God.
So, yeah.
Oh, boy.
For purposes of this, we are going to be referring to the overall system as Wild Talents. When we're specifically referencing Godlike, we will say that. To discuss mechanics, I'm going to begin at the end with Wild Talents 2nd edition, and then talk a little about how Godlike elaborates on that. Wild Talents uses a D10 dice pool system, but with a twist away from the contemporary storyteller system. Rolls are usually based on a combination of stat plus skill. Stats and skills are normally rated from 1 to 5, with 6 to 10 being superhuman or hyper stats and hyper skills. Some powers use their own dice pool to measure success. 10 dice total is the maximum someone can roll. When you roll your dice, you're looking for matching sets of the same number. If you get at least a pair, that is a success. Often that's enough to resolve things, but each roll also has 2 additional measures of success: its height and its width. The height is the number shown on the matching set, so a roll of 1, 3, 5, 5 is a success with a height of 5. This shows the quality of success, with a higher number trumping a lower number. The width is the number of dice which match in the chosen set. So a roll of 1, 3, 5, 5 is a success with a width of 2. Width determines the speed of finishing a task. In combat, it also determines the damage. If you roll multiple sets, you get to choose which set you wish to apply. The overall scale of something, should you need to know that, is the overall size of the dice pool itself. So a 7 dice energy beam is more potent than a 5 dice energy beam. The game also allows for a quick reading of things, which will definitely succeed. In this case, you roll your pool and take the highest die for your height. There's also rules for botches. Wild Talents expands and complicates this system by adding 2 additional kinds of dice: hard dice and wiggle dice. These die types are stronger and connected to superpowers. Hard dice in a player's pool are always set at a 10, so they can only be matched with hard dice or other dice which roll a 10. That means things using hard dice are especially powerful, but also inflexible. Wiggle dice, on the other hand, can be assigned to any value after you've rolled all the other dice in your pool. This makes them extremely flexible. Generally, a success merely requires a single pair for success. However, the GM may assign a difficulty in the form of a minimum height, which must be rolled in order to succeed. Alternately, circumstances may reduce the number of dice being rolled, ranges, multiple actions, etc. Finally, a more severe penalty is a gobble die, most often seen when a character suffers an injury. Each gobble die removes a die from your highest set rolls. The game offers a number of additional options for the GM to customize play, like squishy dice, which can be better controlled, but generally these are the mechanics of the game. Powers have three types, beyond hyperskills and hyperstats, the latter of which have some narrative passive effects. Godlike presents a list of things which it calls cafeteria-style miracles. These are powers which kind of straddle the line between being fully descriptor and fully effects defined. Powers have a cost based on the die type bought for them, with extras and flaws modifying these costs. Each power has qualities like attacks, defends, robust, useful outside of combat, etc. The book notes that variations on these powers are possible. Wild Talents largely keeps this structure, but adds meta qualities to define a character's source, power purchase permissions, and some instinct traits. The terminology gets a little awkward here, with everything being called powers, but abilities unrelated to human abilities being called miracles. For convenience, we're going to call things powers.
Yeah, we hit the terminology problem that we will see throughout here.
And I think that was the thing, once Wild Talents came out, got under my skin, was all the different terms, especially when you're bringing new people up to speed on it.
Yeah.
Wild Talents setup aims for more variability. There's still a list with suggested qualities, flaws, and extras for powers, but there's also a general list to help you combine elements. The power list also defines a power's capacity, mass, range, etc. It feels more effects-based in Wild Talents. An interesting wrinkle in the setup of Godlike is the concept of how will is used. In both games, it represents a resource characters can draw on. But in Godlike, one of the setting conceits is that beings with powers inherently resist power-based effects directed at them. Basically, all powers in Godlike at root derive from a person's imagination and willpower, with higher will characters being both able to affect more and overcome a super with a weaker will. Godlike's first 100 pages cover mechanics, powers, and character creation. That's followed by 160 pages of an exhaustive history of this version of World War II and discussion of the place of talent in society. Then there's 20 pages of weapons, ordnance, and vehicles. That's followed by 20 pages describing campaign styles, including one it focuses on with the characters organized into tactical squads. There's some additional options in the appendix, followed by a 30-page D20 OGL version in tiny print. Tiny print.
Tiny print.
I remember this. Wild Talent Second Edition is about the same page count as Godlike First Edition, but opens up the text design and is more legible. The system mechanics here take up the first 160 pages. That's followed by 36 pages on building a campaign world with different approaches, sources, and cosmology. Then there's 100 pages devoted to providing one history of the world, following on from the events of Godlike up to the modern day.
So Godlike's really interesting. It's credited to Dennis Detweiler, who you mentioned, Greg Stolze, and the now notorious Mike Merles, which I'll mention. Stolze developed the mechanical side. So he created the one roll engine, also known as the OR system. And then he would iterate on that over the next couple of decades. Detweiler created the setting and the framework, and then Merle's role in that is he created that original OGL implementation. essentially a D20 version of the rules that appears in both editions of Godlike, but it doesn't appear in Wild Talents. There's some real interesting and kind of confusing publication things that go on here. There was Pagan Publishing, Debt Library was part of that. There's a whole Call of Cthulhu and a lot of publications that go on. Delta Green early on there in the 90s. Godlike helps lead to the formation of Arc Dream after several false starts and splits. One of the biggest innovations that comes out of this was the ransom approach to game releases. So in the aughts, I don't know what you say for the early 2000s, but
Right.
before Kickstarter, a few companies had tried out a new kind of pre-order to demand format. And this utilized the power of online message boards and fandoms. So basically, they would post a project, set a minimum number of pre-orders required for it to be put into development and be released. This had been done with Arc Dream and with some of the ORG, but on the board game side, it would be GMT games that really drove this forward, and they still use this process successfully with what they call their P500 games. Basically, if they can get 500 pre-orders, they can do the game. That would shift, and in 2006, Arc Dream would use this to fund that first limited hardcover of Wild Talents, which takes that generic modern Super's toolkit based on Godlike's mechanics. This goes on with the sideline, and that Stolze would use this approach and the system for several games, including something called Rain, which he would do several versions of, a base version, and then there's Rain and Kyridian and a number of other things. Stolze went on, he did work on that. He did work on Unknown Armies and the Godsend Agenda and also Delta Green. So that's all early 2000s. 2010, having had real success with this Wild Talents version, they immediately turned it around. They went, oh, we did a very small print run. It sold out. People want a new one. And they immediately set to doing it, but it still took them several years because they really wanted to do a big new edition. So 2010, they get Wild Talents, that nice big hardcover version,
Yeah.
printed a lot of copies of it. I don't know what the sales were like, but it would be a number of years later that they would be selling those books for pretty cheap off their web store, which is how I got a copy of it. So I don't know if that was from a reprint or what.
Right.
But in 2012, they would release a revised edition of Godlike as well. So the last products for any kind of superhero one-roll engine game is another game by Stoltz called Better Angels, and that kickstarted in 2013. It takes those basic ideas, that basic mechanical system, but in this you're playing supervillains,
Hmm.
but you're playing ones who are trying to minimize their awfulness because they're attempting to keep a demon that they have inside them in check. That got a little support. They did a campaign book called No Soul Left Behind, and that came out in 2015. But that's about the last release for the Godlike slash Wild Talent slash One Roll Engine Supers games. There's an interesting thing here in that something that Designers and Dragons makes a point about is Godlike arrives in the landscape in early aughts where there are very few real competitors for solid multi-use superhero RPGs. So by 2001, both Marvel superheroes and DC heroes had flamed out
Hmm.
and Champion's popularity had diminished. There were some real problems, uncertainty whether Hero Games was still around or not for a while. The only competition would appear a few days later, and we would get Silver Age Sentinels briefly, comes from a problematic company, and then more substantially, Mutants and Masterminds, which would really take the lead, and then a lot of indie superhero RPGs.
Right.
And the thing is, by the time that we actually get Wild Talents in 2010 and we get the revised Godlike in 2012, they actually had to compete against Mutants and Masterminds and these other indie games, as well as new games that are coming out of the collapse of that D20 bubble. So, as I said, I got the physical copies of these when Arc Dream cleared out back inventory. And it does seem like Wild Talents and Godlike are still available, but the last physical release was a supplement for Godlike in 2013 and that Better Angels stuff. It really does seem, and it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, Arc
Right,
Dream
right.
hit the bank with Delta Green.
Yeah, they did.
It caught people really where they wanted to be. It updated a setting that people loved, and they brought it into the modern age, modifying the Call of Cthulhu mechanics in a great way. So I don't begrudge them going there, but it does feel like that kind of got left aside. The only thing I do want to mention here, and it's something we are going to eventually come back to, is that during that initial phase, when they did the Wild Talent second edition, they released a number of settings. The most dense is Progenitor,
Mm,
which is really amazing. And we may talk about all of these together as their own episode because there's a couple of other ones interesting. E-Collapse
yeah, that
and
was good.
Grim War. One of those is by Height. Can't remember who the other one by. And then we've mentioned this before, I think. This Favored Land. The last of these is a superhero. The South didn't fall during the Civil War setting that
Mm.
yeah. So that's the publication history.
So Ecolapse and like you said, Progenitor, those are my favorite out of the
hmm
bunch. They were pretty strong. I never got to play them. I liked reading them. I
Yeah,
would
they're
have
really good
enjoyed.
reads.
Yeah.
And there's some interesting toolkits. I think Grimoire 2 is an interesting idea. It feels a little half-baked to me,
Hmm.
but the idea of punk sorcerers as super stuff is interesting. And then Disfavored Land is one of those things that I wish I knew what the dev history was of
Right.
that because it's not a small book.
No, it's not.
It's the
It's not.
second longest of those setting books, and there's real work that goes into it. But we'll come back to that. So talk about the context and the media here.
Yes. Of course, a ton of important superhero comic books started during World War II. Captain America and Superman famously fought against Nazis on the covers of various comic books. In general, these adventures took place on the home front, but some series, like Captain America, had the character embedded with US forces. After the war, that would get dropped. However, with the bringing back of Golden Age heroes in stories like The Flash of Two Worlds, suddenly writers had the opportunity, at least in DC Comics, to consider the implications of superheroes during the war. In 1976, DC relaunched All Star Comics, which took place on Earth 2 with a set of new heroes. This reminded folks of the existing legacy character and their important place in the continuity. That would run for a couple of years before being canceled. More importantly, in 1981, Roy Thomas, Rich Buckler, and Jerry Ordway created All Star Squadron, which featured news stories of all the old DC characters operating during World War II. They fought Axis villains, but the in-universe explanation for why they couldn't affect the actual war was the Spear of Longinus, held by Hitler, which kept them away. All-Star Squadron would run through 1987 when Crisis on Infinite Earths collapsed the continuity, bringing some of those characters into the main continuity for the 1940s. However, despite that visibility and focus, it was Marvel which actually came out of the gate with modern supers in World War II stories, and with characters seriously involved in the fighting. The Invaders first appeared in Avengers number 71 in 1969. It updated the All-Winter Squad from 1946, which only had 2 issues. This team notably featured Captain America, the original Human Torch, and the Submariner. But the Invaders wouldn't get an actual book until 1975. That would run for 41 issues through 1979. The brief Roger Stern, John Byrne run on Captain America in 1980 also notably utilized the Invaders and what had happened to those legacy characters in the present. So the idea of supers and World War II existed within both of the big two, but throughout the period leading up to Godlike, they served as a legacy reference or a brief side topic. On the Marvel side, it wasn't until 2004 that they had another Invader series, and that was a spin-off from a 4-issue Avengers arc, only lasting 10 issues. There would be a crossover between the two teams in 2007. DC, on the other hand, did little material set during the war. 2 notable TV adaptations which combined World War II and superheroes. The first season of Wonder Woman placed itself firmly during the war, with our titular character fighting fifth columnists and Nazi agents, as well as the Marvel superhero show, one of the first animated, and I use this term loosely, shows, draws on Captain America World War II stories until it moved the timeline up to the modern era of Cap being thawed from the ice. So in both cases, the story started with those roots but ended up discarding them. Neither particularly dealt with the idea of superheroes being seriously involved with the war effort. That's funny because I remember that Captain America animated.
When I was a kid, that was on a bad signal out of Chicago we would get, and I could get it was be fuzzy, but I would watch those all the time. Loved them.
I did love them. Outside of comics and TV, probably the most influential media source for the idea of supers and war would be George R.R. Martin's Wild Cards anthology series, 1987. Good stuff.
Yeah.
While set post-war, the inciting story begins with a pulp hero dealing with their feelings about the conflict and their action causing the disaster, leading to the creation of super beings. The next several stories in that anthology present an alternate history, including the impact of supers on Vietnam and other conflicts. Back in comics, though, only a brief sequence, Alan Moore's Watchmen and Darwin Cook's New Frontier also grappled with these issues. We will see more impact of these on Progenitor when we talk about that.
So you have run Godlike Wild Talents. How did you come to that? And what has been your experience like running and playing that?
I'm not normally into World War II or World War One material.
I thought you were a dad.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this before we recorded this today. There are two things that are World War II themed that grab me. It's this, and then there's a board game whose name I can't remember right now, where it's like supernatural World War II. You are playing normal allies against occult, Nazi, supernatural, undead, magical forces in that board game. And then in Godlike, you have these super beings on both sides. And both of those kind of appeal to me. Not so much the World War II stuff. To me, that's the sandbox, the backdrop that we're playing in. Mm-hmm. And even when I ran Godlike, unfortunately, I did what the comics did, is that most of the stuff we did was alongside the war. We didn't really contribute to the war effort one way or the other. It was like a side thing happening in parallel, right?
Right.
I think I may have just gotten back to the United States from being overseas in the military when Godlike came out. I think that's right. It was a small group. It was two other guys, and I ran it. I think that's when I first learned I like smaller groups a little bit better. And then given the mechanics, which we'll talk about, of the one roll engine, if you're the GM, you're rolling a lot of dice if you've got a crowd or a group of NPCs, right? So the second accessory I ever coded was a page full of random D10, and I would just cross them off as I use them. And we played a small, maybe 5 or 6 session series about red mercury, a strange chemical thing we can't let get into the bad guys' hands. And that was the game. I think I liked Godlike because it presented a bunch of superhero stuff that was way different than Marvel superheroes, Champions. Those were probably the two biggest superhero games that I played a lot of prior to Godlike. And it used a different system that I would come to like way, way later. You don't know who goes first or the sequence of things till all the dice at the table, right? Everyone's got to declare actions, what we're doing, and the dice will tell you who goes when and how effective they are. And I love that tension it brings because we don't know till everybody rolls. So you've got to decide. I think the game is different. You have to figure out what you want to do, how you're going to do it, because you have no control over when you're going to go for the most part.
That's really interesting. I'm on record as not liking the declare actions and then you resolve them. But if the order is variable in there and you have some control in terms of what you're going to lean into, that's really interesting.
Right, right. I'm going to be fuzzy on the stats and the powers, but I'm betting there's some powers that let you have a hard die so that If you need to go first, that hard die is going to come up a 10. That probably makes you first. But unless you roll other 10s, that's a weak first action, right? Because you only
Hmm.
got one 10. I'm always mechanics first, but we got a good run. Like I said, it was 5 or 6 games, but they were deep games and it was small. It was just two other players. And probably more supers. Like I said, World War II in the background. We didn't dig too deep, just enough to keep it in that era.
That's really interesting, given how much of
Mm-hmm.
that Godlike book
Yeah.
is World War II minutia
Yeah.
and detail and stuff. It is so much. They go through week by week, month by month of the war that goes on
Yeah.
a couple years extra with all of the alternate history, and it's so grognardy. And it is one of the two things that made me bounce off of that.
Right.
Yes, it's a toolkit for the GM in that they got all these pieces, they can easily do stuff, but to getting the entry point, unless you start right at the start, there's a bunch of stuff you're going to have in mind for the player. But here's the other thing, and I'd like you to speak to this in terms of having run this and having played this. This is the second or third time that I've gone back to try and reread Wild Talents Godlike. And I bounced off of it hard before. The thing that freaked me out this time is this is a game which is actually pretty simple. If you leave aside the fact that there are a bunch of terms that you can easily get mixed up, and width and height, in my mind, I can never remember which is which, and the gobble die, hard die, all this stuff. Besides that, the game is actually pretty simple, but it manages to make it look super complicated.
It does. Yeah.
It's especially true in Godlike. There's an implied density and crunch, and it really makes it look like this is a hard game. This is we've got a crunchy game here going on. When in fact, at base, it's pretty simple. But the
It is pretty
game
simple.
doesn't go, hey, this is very simple. Let me show you what the basics are. And a lot of what's going on here is elaborations on it. You don't have to worry about this. It wants to go, no, no, no. We're not an easy game. No, no, no. We're a serious game.
I think this is one of those. There's a couple of areas in my life where my enthusiasm for a thing, I can't see. That is hard. That is complicated. It's messy. All those things. I think slowing down, we're having this conversation. I think it was my enthusiasm that got me through that stuff. I think that stuff is real. And I say that because the two players I had, I walked them through, I talked them through how stuff worked. And we started as if I was playing with my kid. We start with the easy stuff and then we started adding things in. So we didn't add it all in one shot. I probably even made their first characters. And then as we moved, I think by the third session, they went back and tweaked what they had as they were picking things up. So for sure, there was a hurdle there. And I agree with you. I don't think it needed to be. I think you could have given up some of that World War II history and simplified or given some examples about how some things played out. You could start with just human stuff, right?
Hmm.
And dice rolls, right? And then add the super stuff in on top of that. Because it's just variations on that. You're right.
It does feel like a rewriting of the book to go, hey, we're going to show you in modules what you need to know.
Right.
Let's play out a scenario. Let's walk through a specific example at each of these tiers to get your players up to speed.
Right.
That kind of thing would be maybe a stronger approach to it.
I agree.
And maybe also in Godlike increasing the font size.
I did pick that up before this. I broke my copy out, and you're right. I'm like, I can't believe I must have been a younger man.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
that font, right, is terrible. And that OGL section, I'm like, they didn't
Yeah.
really want you to do anything OGL wise because you can hardly read that.
Oh, no, it's wild how tiny. I mean, they wanted to get it a ton in both of them. It's also worth noting physically, this is glossy, heavy stock paper
Hmm.
in all of these books. These are not our standard White Wolf cheap
Right.
finish. These are serious things, but big books, dense text.
Yeah.
Oof, I don't know. So, what is your impression of the mechanical or feel difference between
Hmm.
Godlike and Wild Talent? Did it feel like there was a difference?
The mechanics are the same. I think will becomes less robust in Wild Talents than it is in Godlike. And I think the Wild Talents are more durable than the talents are in Godlike. In Godlike, I like the will mechanic because you could have someone cancel out another talent's powers just using will, no superpowers whatsoever. But they're also fragile. There were very, very few folks who could take a bullet and keep moving.
Hmm.
Or even like get beat down with a bat by two other people. The heroes, the talents, they had a superpower, maybe with some variations on it, but they were still very fragile, like very mortal, like humans. I think when you get to wild talents, that becomes a little less so. They're a little more tougher. And I like the fragility that they have in Godlike.
We talked about Godlike having this World War II premise.
Hmm.
It is a well-written,
It is.
well thought out conception. I don't want to take anything away from it. I think
Right.
it is perhaps one of the most gritty, realistic conceptions of, okay, what would happen if we had these people? But on top of this, it's not just that we have superheroes, it is that there is a really interesting cosmology here that goes on. And we mentioned Will, that all of these superpowers are entirely based on these people's mental conception of the world.
Right.
All of these heroes do this because they believe they can do this. And they kind of go insane
Right.
in rewriting reality. And we have a number of characters that do literally go insane and become weird figures and cause real problems and stuff. And I have to say, it's a dark fucking premise when
It
push comes
is.
to shove. It's not like any other superhero comic I've ever read or
Right.
cosmology or any kind of thing that we've seen. And I'm kind of going ahead, but if we go from Godlike to Wild Talents, because Wild Talents takes that Godlike premise in
Right.
history, and I want to come back to building the superhero world and how they do that, but runs it up to the quote unquote modern day of the 2010s. And where it goes is batshit insane.
It is bonkers. I had to read maybe a couple of times because I'm like, man, you lost me. What is going on?
Listeners, if you've read The Three Body Problem or seen any of these high concept sci-fi things, where it goes in the last 20 years of the timeline for Wild Talents is nuts. And I'm like, this is not a superheroes game at this point. We have moved away from that to this just being a sci-fi story.
Right.
Yes, I'm sure it is the logical consequence of the world that you've built, but it's also like, how the fuck am I supposed to play in that then?
I felt like having those two in, I could have done without it, but I think having them, you pick, I'm playing somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to share the end state with the players, but I kind of have an idea where things are going. So depending on what develops in play, I've got that backspace I can pull forward and use as a
Yeah.
GM, which I think is useful. But I would have been okay not having that too.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think it becomes more than a superhero game. It's a sci-fi game.
It is interesting because it is one of the few games we've seen that really goes at first purposes.
Hmm.
Here is where superhero powers come from.
Right.
And because they come from this way, that is going to have these knock-on effects.
Right.
If this is the source of them, that's what's going to happen. Eventually, we'll see that in a progenitor.
Right.
The only other thing I could think of that is like this is there is a source book for Mutants and Masterminds, second edition, called Paragons, that is a campaign setting that goes, here is an incident, this is the incident that caused superpowers, and here's how that all plays out from that. But you don't really see that because they want to give everybody this toolbox, this
Right.
grab bag of things.
As I become an old man, I think that toolbox, that grab bag of things is terrible. I do. Don't leave, listeners. No, so I think if you've got stuff like Hero, GURPS, even Cortex to an extent, that requires somebody who has an idea, a vision of what it is they want at the table, and they take that toolbox and they narrow it down and they build the thing that they want. And I think in those cases, those are fantastic. But to say,
Hmm.
here's the game, make some superheroes and go, I'm cranky now. This is why I like Godlike over Wild Talents, because it's very specific.
Right.
And the premise is tight. It's strong. Everything's going to fit in there. I think Wild Talents, while still constrained, it's still kind of open. You still got a lot of room in there to get crazy and wild.
It is a vision of this is Detweiler's voice.
Right.
He shares some of the writing duties in Wild Talents, but Godlike is his baby, and you can really hear that voice come through. Have you by any chance read Unmasked? This is the superhero setting for Cypher System.
I have not.
Okay,
I have
we'll have to
not.
talk about this later. This is
Okay.
also by
Okay.
Dennis Detweiler,
Really? Okay.
and it's a 1980s with a very specific premise that I think is really dark, even though it doesn't look like it on the surface, and has some wild implications. And again, it feels like the same thing where he had an idea with a very core premise because superpowers don't come about in any way that we would normally expect
Right.
in that unmasked setting. And what that means in terms of the world is really interesting. The other thing is, Wild Talents has a great section on how you build a superhero world.
Yes.
They call it hyper foundations, and they have a set of axes.
Mm-hmm.
And those axes are there's red, which is historical inertia. How much can you change the world? And these go from like 1 to 5. Again, we're using the numbers that we have from Wild Talents. We've got gold, which is talent inertia, like how much powers will change, how much that will adapt. I'm kind of looking through the text here. Blue, which is, he says, the lovely and the pointless, which is about the weirdness. I think the
Right.
paranormal stuff, how much of that there is in the world, how much high strangeness there is.
Right.
Black, which of course is the black, white, and gray, the moral clarity of the setting.
Right.
And I think that's a really interesting way to define a game world. Again, in the way that you're talking, where we set some boundaries, we set
Right.
some expectations rather than, hey, let's make a superheroes. Because I mean, we play masks, people just grab playbooks, we get to the table, we don't talk about the cosmology, we're not talking about the
Right.
history. That's all emergent in play.
Right.
And you don't put limits on what people can do there. Because I always think of World War II as okay, yeah, that's a common thing in superhero games, but it's actually not.
Right. Right.
In 1985, there's Golden Age of Champions, which is a third-party product for Champions. It's one of the first Champion source books, but it just kind of comes out and goes. It isn't until 1994 that Hero System actually does a superheroes World War II book.
Right.
And then they drop that after one. There's a sixth edition version, but that's also done by a third party.
Huh.
Marvel Superheroes does a World War II source book, but it's time travel. You go back and fight alongside
Right.
Nick
I
Fury.
was gonna bring that up. I'm like, usually it's time travel.
Yeah. DC Heroes, on the other hand, did a Joe Kubert, Easy Company, World at War source book.
Gotcha.
And then the only other thing before or in parallel to Godlike is the Algernon Files, which is a third-party Blackworm Publishing, did a World War II Heroes collection. That was a book that came out for Mutants and Masterminds and for
Okay.
Champions. And it was pretty rich. And then later on, Icons and Squadron UK and stuff get some World War II supplements, but it's not nearly as much as I expected.
Right. Oof, man, it's two controversial things I'm saying tonight.
Let's get your hot take.
For me, World War II, wars in general, as a setting for superheroes, I would narrow that down. I bounce off of that because I bounce off of World War II as a gaming
Mhm.
genre. But that's in the same bucket for me as King Arthur stuff. I can't.
I wish I liked Pendragon. I wish I liked
Right.
Vikings. Like these are a couple of things that I do not give a shit about.
Right. I just don't care.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's so much World War II stuff when we get to
Yeah.
Weird War, World War
Yeah.
II, and then
Yeah.
the two different, both highly developed lines of Call of Cthulhu World War
Right.
II.
Right. Yeah. I just can't do it.
As Rich says, not my bag.
Yeah. Not my bag. But Godlike made it easy for me to pick it up. I didn't change the setting. I went through all the history that they had and figured out where I wanted to play. And I knew I wanted to be overseas for World War II. I didn't want to be stateside. I want to be in the war somewhere, even though we're not really engaging with it.
Hmm.
It's scenery we're moving through, or the barriers we're playing against or around.
I want to mention one other piece of weirdness before I throw to you to talk about. You're prepping some wild talents right now to kind of give it another try, right?
Yes, I
Uh,
am. I should be the archaeologist GM.
yeah. I do want to call your attention to one thing, and this is at the beginning of the Godlike book. And again, this comes
Hmm.
out 2005.
Right.
And there's two introductions in the book. The first
Hmm.
one is by Dennis Detweiler, and then it is followed by Greg Stolze. And the first one is Dennis Detweiler absolutely trashing meta plots
Hmm.
and all this stuff about presetting these things and meta plots and letting people have freedom and all of this stuff and hard coding the history and not letting people go to it is a pretty direct attack on White Wolf.
Right.
And in particular, if you think about the context, this is just a few years after Aberrant came out from White Wolf. So it feels to me like an absolute repudiation of everything that White Wolf is doing
Right.
and a real slap at Aberrant without naming Aberrant. And that may not be the intent, but boy, does it read like the intent.
Right. Right. Because they're close. It's right there. Yeah.
It's followed by Greg Stoltz thanking all of the White Wolf people for their help.
Back to back in the
Back to
same
back,
book.
like back to back, right, one right after the other, right at the start of the book. It is the most just whiplashy thing I've ever seen.
Wow. That's funny.
Dennis Detweiler is, if you've ever followed him on any of the social media things, he says what he thinks.
Yes.
Let's just put it that
Yes.
way.
He does say what he thinks.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Which, for better or worse, he's not like some of the dinosaurs that we've seen out there
Right. I agree.
that say
I
what they
agree.
think, and I go, oh boy,
Yeah.
let me just mute and block you from now on. But you've gone and you're thinking about running Wild Talents again. What has been the process of doing that? We're going to look at it again. What has that been like?
So I think I get here through working on Lifted in Cortex. In my head, Cortex has some DNA, some genetics you don't mess with. You leave it because that's that game.
Hmm.
Fate is the same way.
Right.
When I did clock winders for Fate, there's certain things it's not designed to do that kind of thing.
100%.
What I want is a gritty, a fragile system for Lifted. I didn't know that at the beginning. I know that now.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to get that with Cortex without pulling some things out of Cortex, right? I'd have to make Cortex a different game, and I don't know that the Cortex fans want Cortex that way. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Yeah, it's a robust, competency
Right,
focused game.
right. But I feel like Wild Talents gets me, or Godlike for sure, gets me the feel I'm after, but I need to get it back to the table, play it to figure it out, if that's what I want. Going through porting some of the characters I have from Cortex to Wild Talents on paper, it looks like I'm getting what I want. They could have some heavy, inflexible powers, but that doesn't make them a tank, right? It doesn't
Hmm.
make them invulnerable. They still got a lot of other choices and things like that to make. Now, what I will miss is I think no one has relationships like Cortex does when you use pathways.
Hmm.
You get a lot of stuff when you go through that pathways process. And then you bring that into the game, you make that the game. But I at least want to get 3 or 4 sessions, 5 or 6 if I can pull it off, with Wild Talents in a lifted setting to see what that looks like, how that plays. And then is it nostalgia or is there game there? Always when I bring back an old game, my question always is my memory flawed? Is it nostalgia or is there a real game in here that still stands up today? I did that with Rollmaster, and I would say I would never play it again except for with other people who know how to play it.
Yeah.
When I do that, there's a game there. But if I got to teach it, then I'm not getting the stuff that's there because you haven't learned it. So I want to see if Wild Talents is there. I'm excited. I'm enthusiastic about it, but that might all be nostalgia.
We'll have you report back on that. You're hitting on a really interesting conversation about, especially with superhero games, what the mechanics do in terms of their implication for what the world has to look like.
Right.
Champions, the way that it handles physical damage versus killing damage tells us some implications about what things look like.
Right.
GURPS has that same thing. But yeah, as you say, Fate, there are some things that work very well with Fate
Mm-hmm.
and things that don't without a lot of throwing away some basic things, like having to really retool shit
Right.
to get it
Right.
to work that way.
Right.
And I say this to somebody like you who's played Fate and likes Fate, and I enjoy it.
Yeah. I got a lot of enjoyment out of both these games. I'm excited that we'll talk about Progenitor on its own. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
E-commerce is good too.
I think maybe we do an episode where we talk about those four supplements,
Yeah.
maybe giving focus to Progenitor, but I think we ought to talk about them all together as a suite
Yeah.
in terms of how they differently approached Wild Talents to rework it, because it is an interesting thing. I'm leaving out mention of Kerberos Club because they did that for a couple of different things.
Right. Now I remember that.
Yeah. Well, okay, that sounds great. Thank you for suggesting Godlike Wild Talents. Listeners, that is our show. This is a production of the Open Hearth Gaming Community. You can find out more about that at openhearthgaming.com. Hey, this is a podcast. And so it's at this point that we go, hey, you should support us. You know how you can support us? You can support us on Patreon at the Open Hearth Patreon, which we have a link in the show notes. Hey, if you like this show or any of our shows, supporting us that way is great. A buck or whatever. Or honestly, just sharing this on social media, mentioning it to people. If you know people who are interested in this and passing it around to them in Discords or whatever, that really helps. It's all word of mouth. We don't have advertising or anything like that. We are screaming into the void. So anything you can help to relay that scream outward would be appreciated. So you can check that out. I have a link to my stuff and to Jay's stuff in the show notes as well. Jay, thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fun. I appreciate it.
And listeners, that is our show.